Okay, hello people. Sorry for these problems with the machine. I'm glad we finally sorted it all out. To introduce myself, I'm Sasha from KMP Labs, coming from Serbia. And this is my friend Ryan, also KMP Labs developer, the man who makes the most awesome screencasts on KMP University. If you didn't check that out, I suggest you to do so. So today, we will do a Doctrine workshop, the basic one. So before we start, I would like to know, did you ever work with Doctrine? Oh, that's a lot of people. The workshop is pretty basic, so I expected, because last year we had a lot of beginners, and it was hard to follow, so I prepared a really basic one. But during the workshop, if you have any ideas or questions, just ask. And is there anybody who never worked with Doctrine before? Anybody that never worked with Doctrine? You will have the most fun.
The rest of you, though, you can try, if you have some extra credit on some exercises, and also just think of your own extra credit. You've done Doctrine before, try to do something you've never done before.
Yeah.
And we'll see if you can break things.
Try to experiment, and feel free to ask. And inside of the repository, you have a slides directory for each step. And the most important one is the help, where you can see the list of all steps and the branch you can check out if you get stuck. So if you have any problems or it doesn't work and you are unable to follow, just check out the branch and continue from there. Most importantly, you that have problem with your machine, so just check out the step I'm on and continue to follow with us. So before we start with the workshop, I would like to tell a few words about Doctrine. Doctrine is an ORM for PHP. It's object relational mapper. And the Doctrine project consists of several sub-projects. The most important ones that we'll work with today is the Doctrine abstraction layer, and on top of that, the ORM. The abstraction layer is just a layer that is responsible for abstracting the database. So the idea is basically that you work with the same APIs that are above the database, so you can easily switch RDBMS if you want. So if you are developing with MySQL, for example, and you decided to switch to Postgre, it will be just one configuration parameter, and you can continue to work without any changes. In theory, this is the idea of abstraction layer. And on top of that, there is a relational mapper. And the idea behind it is to actually, when you work with relational databases, you work with a set of tuples. So you have tables with columns and rows. So you have fields and the IDs, which refer to other rows. And in your code, if you are doing object-oriented programming, you work with object. So it's not very handy to work with this kind of data. And ORM solves the problem of transforming this data from database to objects and back from objects to database, so you don't have to worry about the database itself. You're thinking in terms of objects rather than thinking about the database itself. And this process of turning the database raw data into objects, it's called hydration. And the other way around, when you're turning objects into actually insert SQL queries, when you actually write your objects, your representation of your data into database, is called persistence. And most of the time, it's about hydration, so fetching the data, creating the objects, working with them, manipulating, and then persisting them back to your database. So this is the minimum amount of theory that you need to know in order to follow the workshop. Any questions so far? No? Okay, great. So, for this workshop, we prepared the demo project that will actually be the collection of wines, because today in the evening we have a wine tasting. So I took some time to get a list of Eastern wines, a minimum amount that we need. So we will use this data to get introduced into Eastern wines, different kinds, and we will actually, the idea was to make a small web shop when you can buy wines, but since we have a minimum amount of time, let's just try to model the product and the categories that we can categorize these wines and manipulate with them, and use this example for the doctrine. So the first step is to get to know the project we are working with. So as you can see, we have some minimal Symfony setup here. How many of you is familiar with Symfony framework? Okay, that's enough, but even if you're not, we'll use Symfony as less as possible. It will just serve us to set up the doctrine easier. But if you master Doctrine with this project, where Doctrine is already bootstrapped for you, it will be pretty easy to integrate it to any other framework, because in documentation you only need to follow how to bootstrap the Doctrine in order to get it working. And here we have a small configuration file that just configures via Doctrine bundle, just configures Doctrine to connect to our database and to do the mapping.
For people that use Symfony framework, what's different in this project? What's that? Yeah, lots of configuration files. Yeah, so this is like a Symfony, but smaller. So I'm just curious, if you use Symfony framework, you might be looking at this going, something's not quite the same here. So there's less configuration files. What else? Which one? Yeah, the app folder is missing. Basically, everything is at the root. So everything that's normally an app is right at the root. And there's probably one other change. The SRC folder is missing. No SRC folder. A lot of times you'll see SRC/app bundle. That's right at the root. So it's familiar with Symfony. Everything is just basically moved up one directory. There's a few less files, which is just kind of a nice, smaller version of Symfony. But don't be confused. It's just a few things moved around, but it's still all the same stuff that you're used to.
Yeah, and this is Ryan's idea to have this minimal setup. I really liked it, so I took it from his workshop and just put it there, just to save ourselves from like bootstrapping Doctrine manually. And at the end, the Symfony framework itself, the idea was to have like multiple distributions available. I mean, the most popular is the Symfony standard distribution, but this is the idea to be able to have various kinds of setups. It's that flexible, and like for Linux, you have different distributions like Ubuntu, Debian, etc., and so on. Same you can do with Symfony. You can make your own distribution. It's just about the convention. Where do you put your stuff? And in this particular example, we have a controller inside the app bundle, which is in root, and we have views in resources views as we usually have. So the page that we are looking at is, my mouse does not work for some reason. So is this page is actually the default controller homepage action. And we're just rendering the view here. So that's what we have inside. And since Doctrine bundle is set up, you can go to your command line, and we will use the command line a lot. Oh, let me just fix this font size. Sorry?
Hit cancel. Hit close. Try.
No, not with this terminal. Oh, I lost my mouse. Sorry, I have some problems with the trackpad. I will just reboot. Sorry, I have some problems. While I'm fixing it, you can go to your terminal, and in the root of your project, there is a console command. Try to run it and see the list of commands available. Yeah, even that is simpler. To learn the console, you will see that you have a few commands here from the Doctrine bundle. The one that you need is the Doctrine database create. When you run it, the database should be created.
Do we run this from inside the virtual machine, outside the virtual machine, or it doesn't matter? Inside, why? Sorry, yeah, because inside the virtual machine it's going to connect. It's going to try to connect the database, so the database is inside the virtual machine.
Yeah.
That's not true necessarily of all commands. Like there's the debug router command, prints your routes. That doesn't connect to any database, so assuming you have a working between that can be run from inside or outside. But typically, obviously, we'll run everything inside.
Okay, it looks like you already have database created, so it's okay. You can try to drop it, like Doctrine database drop, and then create it again, just to make sure that it works and to try the command. Can you drop it? Yeah. You need to use --force option. Doctrine developers wanted to keep you safe, to not accidentally drop the database.
I have dropped the database on production from Doctrine 1.
Good job.
When that --,
That's when they changed the force.
but now I just always run with --.
Okay, ready for the next step? Okay, so make sure that you created a database, so we have a database to work with in the next step, because we are creating our first entity. The entity is the actual table representation in the object points of view. So we'll create a product entity. If you ignore the annotations, it will be basically the plain PHP object with few public properties. And if you ignore the annotations, it will be like you're not working with database, but working with a plain object. So just copy the entity inside the bundle entity folder. So what you need to do is you create entity folder and just copy the content. We'll explain what it means. Save it in product PHP file. So our product will have ID, like any table, name, price, and description. As you can see, we use annotations to define what columns in the database, in the table, will be mapped to which field. That's why what is required for object relational mapper in order to map our fields to the database. And if you do everything correctly, you're good to go to the command line now and run Doctrine schema create. This will read the mapping information. Can you follow? Doctrine also provides some interesting commands to query your database. So you can use actually, you can use query SQL to query your database, but in order to see the tables, you will need to connect to, because you don't have MySQL client on your Organ box, we'll just wait to insert some data so you can query it later. But for now, just trust that the product table is created.
We do have the MySQL command line.
Yeah, if you're familiar with MySQL command line, you can definitely do that. It will be MySQL dash yeah, user, password, and so on. For those that are familiar with Doctrine, you can try to add some constraints if your product already works. But there is another thing I want to show you when you're working with the product entity. Sometimes you don't want to give away your properties public, like I did here. And Doctrine allows you to make them private or protected and provide getters and setters for each field. Like it will work if I say private and just provide so this will work as well. So you have that kind of flexibility to make your product properties private. You can try that as well. We're later creating a category entity, so you can use generate command to generate it.
There's also a little known, I don't actually know anybody that's used it, but questions about indicators and setters, because obviously we make them private indicators and setters. Because Doctrine doesn't have any magic that automatically like sets the values for you like other ORMs. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. There is like some random base class that Doctrine ships with though, that actually contains the magic getters and setters. If you want to have other entities extend that, somebody can see if they can find it. There's some base entity class, if you want to, you can extend. And then you don't have to have the getters and setters, because it has the magic getter and magic get and magic set function.
What I always recommend, and I personally try to do, I don't always want to give all my properties like that to the public. So I often create a private properties and create minimum amount of getters and setters that I need in order to get it working. And then when I feel the need that I really need some field to be public, I add the method for it. No need to just by default give everything away. As always, if you didn't manage to follow, just switch to the next branch. So now that we have a product entity, let's provide a code that is able to handle the product creation. So we can insert some vines into the database and see how the persistence works. So how Doctrine handles the creation of new objects, entities, and how it translates that to the database. So we'll create a new Symfony controller. It's just a simple PHP class on this path. So you just create a new class product controller with the content I provided in the slide. So let's do it together. So it's new file, product controller. And let's paste the content. So I wanted to save you from coding in Symfony, but what this basically do is create a new route on this URL and the action to handle this route. So what you need to do is just to fill this to do when we're creating project. And just to make sure that everything works, I will just dump hello here and try to visit this URL. It's product create. Wrong URL. Okay, I will dump it at the top because I still don't have the view. Sorry? Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so the action works, but in order to be able to create some products to submit data, we need HTML template. And you have that as well on the slide. So we're creating a new view. Inside views, products create. So it's in resources view, new folder product, and new template. Create HTML twig, and the content pasted from the slide as well. It's a simple form, HTML form. Didn't use much of a Symfony here, just a plain HTML where you can submit the product data. So at this point, I just created the action and the template. No Doctrine yet, we will handle Doctrine ourselves. I will wait until you all have this page ready. Okay. So what we need to do here, we are just instantiating a new product entity that we already created. So it's a product variable, and we say it's a new product. So we just created a new instance of a product entity. And now what we need to do is to set the data that we get from the request. So we say product, set name, and now we get the value from the request object. And in Symfony, you do it like request get name. And we do that for price, and for description. So simple creation of a PHP object, nothing too fancy, something that you probably do without Doctrine as well. And then the magic happens. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Thanks. Actually, we can remove action because you have a problem with loading profiler, and you need to have index.php in the URL. You can remove action completely because by default it will submit to the same page, the same URL. So just remove action from your form, and you will be fine. And so yeah, just created a new product entity, and in order to tell Doctrine to save this product into the database, we need to get the entity manager. The entity manager is a Doctrine class that handles entity persistence, deletion, and everything that it's the main class responsible for handling your entities. And what you need to do is to get it, and you get it from Symfony because it have a nice get Doctrine, get entity manager.
Some of you guys might not have a set name method or a set price method or a set description method. If your properties are still public, you didn't make those functions, that's fine.
Yeah, you can.
Product arrow name, product arrow description, product arrow price. There's not magic that's going to give you that set function automatically. Either you made it or it doesn't exist.
Yeah, for those who don't have setters or don't have or didn't check out to the next step, you can set them like this as Ryan explained. Um, And now, let's use our entity manager to persist the product. It's entity manager persist method. And flush. So, what happens here? First, you created a product. You created a class. It holds mapping information. Then you get the entity manager and said, okay, I want to persist this object. And in that moment, you just let know the doctrine that you want to save it. You didn't save yet, you just declared that this project needs to be saved. And it is not saved until you say flush. And you can use flush to actually trigger the generation and running of the actual SQL instance statements that will write into your database. Why is it make it two-step? Because sometimes you want to persist multiple objects that are related or non-related, but like you're just saying, I want this in my database, I want this, that, this, and at the end you can run flush without any parameters, and Doctrine will have registered all the entities that need to be persisted and just generate SQL statements required to write them and just flush into your database. So that's why we need these two steps in order to write. So if you coded that, we can test. I need my wine list now. Okay, what do you prefer? Do you like wine? Anybody likes wine? Which one? Do you tasted some of this? I mean, Chardonnay is pretty widely known, right? I hope we'll see some of this today. Okay, let's go for this one. How does wine actually cost in Croatia? What do you think? Make a guess. 50 kuna. Let's make it 55. And this is a white wine. Okay, let's make some errors. Oh, looks like it works. In order to make sure that I actually write in the database, I will use console doctrine query run. Doctrine query SQL. And now let's say select. Is there. As you can see, I inserted one record into product table. So looks like this ORM magic works. Does it work for you? Yeah, if you see that the get entity manager is deprecated, and it will be replaced by get manager. I noticed that just before the camp. We created the product and just tried to list the products we created to see how the hydration part works. So Doctrine. Test, test. Doctrine will now have to fetch data from database and create product objects. So we'll create another action in our controller again. So just go to the controller, and from the slide for the step 4, just paste this action into the code. So we're creating a new action. On the route product, and it will render index HTML twig. You can also paste it from the slide. It will live inside product folder. So we go resources, product, index. So again, I saved you from all the Symfony work. It's just a new action, and it just assigns a list of products that we're about to fetch from database and pass to the twig template, which renders the content. And in order to make the page works, because now it should show the empty list. If I go to the product, the list is empty. So I go back to the code to fix this to-do I left to actually fetch the product list. And now we are introducing another thing the Doctrine provides. These are the entity repositories. And when you say, let's fetch entity manager again, you can copy it from below. Just get Doctrine, get entity manager. And there is command, if you open entity manager, there is command, there is action, sorry, get repository. And it provides an API to get the repository class for your entity. And the repository classes are the classes that are responsible for fetching data, like finding the entity you want by some criteria or stuff like that. And it will give us the instance of Doctrine RM entity repository, which provides us with some handy methods for querying the database. And in this tab, we will focus particularly on find all method. Find all, which will just fetch the list of all the records we have in database. So what we need to do is just say entity manager, get repository, and say app bundle product. This is the shortcut for the entity path. This is the Symfony stuff. If you are not using Symfony, you will be required to provide a full class name like this. It will actually boil down to this. So by providing the entity class, we have the repository for that, and then we just call find all. And if you dump that, I know we're going to break soon. I will just dump so you can see what is inside before we render it. It is an array of products. I have only one. Let me quickly add one more to make things more interesting. Product. Great. So it's a list of products. As you can see, each of items in the array is the instance of app bundle entity product and have these fields. So what I need to do now is just render this list. So I have this inside and just go there. And now, is there anybody that's not familiar with Twig template engine? Anybody? You're all familiar with Twig template engine? Actually, even if you're not, it's just using this double curly braces to render variables. And here we have a list of products which we're iterating over in the for loop. And then we just say product name, product price, and product description. And here are my wines that I created so far. So let me help you to complete this step. So just fetch all and render. Just format, so it's easier for you to follow. I'm really glad to see that most of you is following the workshop, which is great. Имаш ли силнел неки? Трябва да крие. Persist, slash, dobro. Radi, ali list ne radi. Aha, dobro, sad samo slash product. Да видим, да видим, не, да видим контролер. Аха, лети ова рута. Нisi копирал слайд. Dobro, radiš se od početka, super. Yeah. I'm just waiting for those. So okay, I will stop there so you can grab a coffee, make some break, and then we'll continue.